Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for November 23rd through the 29th, 2025. As we move into the holiday season, the insanity has continued, so let's get right to it. Here in the United States, the focus this week has largely been in the world of counter-immigration, but also in the world of counter-terrorism and the relationship between those two sort of mission sets. We of course have the ICE raids which continue around the United States to combat illegal immigration as well as criminal enterprises. But we also have a larger trend developing to maybe examine some of these communities in the United States which have been host to significant levels of crime and corruption. Continuing the trend from last week, the biggest focus on that front has been the Somalian situation in Minneapolis, which has really come into focus over the past week due to the terrorism concerns in Washington, D.C. As most of us have heard by now, there was a terror attack that occurred in Washington, D.C. by which an Afghan migrant, specifically one of the Afghans that was brought to the United States underneath the Special Immigrant Visa Program, the program to bring alleged allies to the United States. Well, one of these guys ended up shooting two National Guard soldiers, as we know, in D.C. And even though that was a fairly isolated lone wolf attack, still horrific, but more or less isolated, that terror attack has really spawned a lot of other initiatives, which we'll get into in just a moment. Overseas, our friends in the Yookay are not doing super well these days. They are working through their own immigration issues in their homeland, but also this week, some justice reform kind of plans have come to light, which have not been perceived very positively. Other points of focus for this week have been the continued peace talks in Ukraine. The general sentiment is positive. We don't have any details on the exact specifics of what this peace plan might entail, but all sides seem to be quite amiable still, so that's a good sign. And throughout Europe at large, one of the more time-sensitive issues that have come to light are the problems with quite a few Airbus aircraft that have prompted emergency management requirements and repairs to be made during the busiest holiday travel season of the year. So pretty busy week, a lot of different things going on. And for strategic movement this week, of course, all eyes are still on Venezuela. The will they, won't they continues. No real major change. The U.S. continues to conduct strikes down in South and Central America. So all in all, everything continues as before. However, this week there was one item of note, which involved a brief bit of naval diplomacy being exchanged between the United States and Russia. So there was a commercial tanker vessel from Russia, which was trying to run the American sort of blockade to carry a shipment of naphtha to Venezuela. Now, I say sort of blockade because the United States has not officially entered into a state of naval blockade with Venezuela. Ships can come and go, commercial ships come and go all the time from Venezuela, so there hasn't really been any challenging bits on that front, except for now, one of these tankers was held up a little bit, I'll say. The U.S. just kind of made it hard for them to get around and get to Venezuela for a while, but eventually they did make it into Venezuela to carry out their shipment of sanctioned materials, so the United States clearly does not want to anger Russia at this particular time, otherwise we would have boarded the vessel and just seized it, but the U.S. is probably trying to get a peace deal solidified in Ukraine before going into Venezuela. That's been a big theory. What's going to happen first? Are we going to invade Venezuela first, or are we going to wait till Ukraine is done? It's hard to say. I don't know. I don't know if anybody can really know for sure, but clearly the United States didn't really want any part of that action, so they're just going to let it go for now, but we'll see how the future turns out. Things are still very tense. I know that a lot of times we talk about Venezuela and then nothing happens, so we get complacent, right? Most of these ships kind of stay in their own patrol areas for weeks and months on end sometimes, so it's kind of hard to remain motivated to be aware that a good chunk of the U.S. Navy is still parked off the coast of Venezuela. But either way, we'll keep an eye on the situation and see how things develop from here. Now, before we touch on the D.C. terror attack this week, I have a quick update on the immolation attack that occurred back on November 17th. The victim of that attack was identified as Bethany McGee. She is the victim of the immolation attack that took place on the Blue Line in Chicago a couple of weeks ago. And fortunately, she survived the attack and is currently working through her treatment plan. So I took this screenshot from the GoFundMe page that her family set up on her behalf. There are not a whole lot of details on how she's doing, but I did want to pass this along. Some good news. She did survive the attack, despite how brutal and horrific it was. And her family is trying to protect her privacy and make it so that she can tell her story whenever she wants to. So we're probably not going to get a whole lot of details on her condition. But yeah, I just wanted to share the good news that she did survive that attack and is progressing through her treatment. Moving down to Washington, D.C., a quick update on the status of the soldiers that were attacked. Unfortunately, Specialist Sarah Beckstrom suffered non-survivable wounds, and she passed away the night before last. Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf is still with us. Per the updates from his family, he is doing better than they expected, so prayers are very much appreciated for both of these soldiers all the way around. Regarding the attacker himself, Ramanullah Lakhanwal, the status of his wounds is not clear. His general status is also not clear either. He's obviously in custody, however, we don't really have much information on what his deal is so far. All of the information that has been released so far confirms that he was indeed one of the members of the Afghan Special Forces teams that aided the United States during the global war on terrorism there, and that he deliberately carried out the attack for reasons that are not entirely clear at the moment. There have been a lot of rumors and really kind of unsubstantiated claims circulating regarding why he conducted the attack. At this point, it's kind of hard to say. Some claims have been made, again, unsubstantiated, but claims have been made that he was selected for deportation, or he was scared he was going to be deported, or something like that. Other claims say that that wasn't really what it was, but he, like many other Afghans who came here to the United States, got here and found out that it wasn't exactly what he thought it was. Other claims have focused on him always secretly being a jihadi and wanted to carry out attacks against the United States for any number of ideological reasons. I haven't really seen anything quite concrete, but since he did survive the attack, maybe we'll figure out what the deal was. Obviously, during the attack, he was shouting Islamic phrases that are typical of more lone wolf kinds of attacks. But it's hard to say, did he conduct this attack because he's an Islamic extremist or because of some other reason? Very, very hard to say. We're just going to have to kind of leave this one up in the air for the moment because we just don't know. Now, one thing that we do know, however, and I wanted to mention again, I mentioned it in the wire, but I'll mention it again now, are the concerns with AI during this case. So we saw this first during the Charlie Kirk shooting when the FBI released the photos of that suspect. But we saw it again with this attack as well, and what I'm referring to is people taking photos of the suspect and running them through AI to clean up the image, but the problem is that the AI models that they're using completely change the facial features of the suspect. As we can see from the actual image of Ramanullah Lakhanwal, he looks nothing like the AI manipulated image of him being put into the back of the ambulance. So this is a problem. This is becoming a huge problem when it comes to live tracking incidents, because now we're starting to see even more mainstream media outlets, more journalists starting to implement AI into their suspect photos. It is very much a lesson in discernment, in pumping the brakes and making sure that we have the right information at the time, because sometimes we may have to make critical decisions, and we can see this during this case. One of the things that we have to be aware of when it comes to tracking real-time terrorist attacks that are unfolding, before our very eyes on social media, we have to be aware that there could be more. In this case, the DC authorities clearly thought so too. The White House was locked down, several military installations throughout the region increased their force protection levels. Ronald Reagan International Airport was shut down for a period of time due to an unnamed security incident. So clearly, the people who are working this crisis on the ground in real time in DC, they were clearly thinking, this guy might not be alone. And that's not a bad assumption to make at the time. Now, of course, in hindsight, we know that this guy was a lone wolf kind of attacker, but when things are going down, you get 2 National Guard soldiers being shot very brutally from a very close range where the attacker is screaming Islamic phrases, right? And if all of this takes place within a block of the White House, you have to think, okay, this may be a bigger incident than just this one guy. So this is where the concerns of AI come in. Obviously, no APB was put out for this guy because he was detained at the scene, he was shot, he was taken down right then and there. But if he had gotten away, then it's very, very likely that AI would have been used to manipulate his photos so that people would be on the lookout for the wrong guy, right? It is very, very disturbing to me personally how much AI has been implemented into people's daily lives to the point to where it's no longer being used as a research tool or something like that, but it's meant to replace organic human thought. To me, personally, that's very, very disturbing, and it makes my job much more difficult when I've got real people sharing around just AI-generated content or AI-manipulated content during a crisis. That is not helpful, right? It's made up. People are starting to outsource their humanity to AI, and that's a bigger problem for another time. But in terms of crises like this, it just means that I have to go through and do a lot more work to find a photo of the actual suspect before it was manipulated by AI. So that's something to keep in mind as we go on, because these attacks are probably going to continue. And here's why. One of the reasons why this is such a contentious topic is due to the fallout from this shooting incident. Now, I'll say right up front that one single lone wolf attack, or even just a string of lone wolf attacks, is not really indicative of a higher level, top-down, masterminded plan by an insurgent group or a terrorist organization. But this incident does tie into other groups because the shooter was one of those heavily vetted people that we brought into the United States that was allegedly one of our closest allies in the region, right? And unfortunately, due to the amount of NGOs that are involved in all of this, adversarial positions are starting to be solidified. And here's what I mean by that. So follow this timeline with me for just a moment. Terrorist attack occurs in Washington, D.C. The United States government finds out that it was actually one of the guys we brought in. He should never have been brought in here. We vetted him, but clearly not enough, so on and so forth. The White House then decides to temporarily shut down all immigration from Afghanistan. We're going to shut down the Special Immigrant Visa Program until we can investigate this and see what in the Sam Hill happened. So now we've entered into a state of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because the United States cannot do nothing, right? We find out that one of the people that we brought here in good faith turned out to be a traitor. But on the other hand, what does that action do? It brings all of these NGOs out of the woodwork. Once again, problems caused by NGOs to stir up dissent. So what have we got brewing right now? We've got a lot of Afghans who came to the United States just like this guy. There are probably hundreds of identical people to this guy scattered all around the country that we brought here under the exact same program, probably on the exact same flight. And all of these NGOs are trying to stir up hatred because they think they're going to get deported. So now we've got a vicious cycle going, right? Man commits a terrorist attack. We say we're going to deport terrorists. So now they're more motivated to be a terrorist because they think they're going to get deported because it pushes them into a corner. But we have to push them into a corner because we don't want them here. It is just an insanely vicious cycle, right? There are some rumors that this guy may have committed the terror attack because he did not want to get deported back to Afghanistan because he had either overstayed his visa or he had been denied long-term residency. I don't know. It's a rumor, right? So you can't confirm anything, but you're stuck between a rock and a hard place because you have to deport people who are terrorists, but in the act of trying to deport them, they conduct a terrorist attack. You've got the same result, right? So all of this is to say we have now entered into spicy times in which no half measures will suffice. If there is even one person, even just one person who might be a traitor in all of the people who we brought into this country, they've got to go. What are the chances that there's at least one other person just like this guy in the United States in the exact same situation from the exact same country? I can tell you it's probably not zero. What are the chances that this could happen again? I don't know, but again, it's not zero. And now that you've got NGOs trying to poke and prod the Afghan population in the United States to turn on the U.S. government, that's a problem too. Something that I didn't mention in the wire but should help in terms of context are the protests that have been occurring in Doha over the past few days. Let me tell you, Afghans have the absolute worst possible timing. Exactly one day before this terrorist attack took place in D.C., a lot of Afghan refugees that the United States is currently holding in Qatar decided to protest. So the Afghans that we're holding in Qatar, they're protesting against the U.S. government on an active duty military base. And what are they protesting? They're protesting the fact that it has taken a few years for them to get approval to travel to the United States after we evacuated them. So, for those who don't know, we didn't just fly people directly from Kabul to the United States. A lot of them we offloaded to other places around the region, one of those places being Doha. So there was a camp there, an old U.S. military base, mostly used for logistics, that we set up a bunch of housing for these Afghans. And it turns out they don't really like it so much. But again, their timing is rather poor. So at this point, it doesn't really matter what their original gripe was or if they had any credence, because right now, I can tell you, the sentiment is not great. Most people of the GWAT persuasion think that these Afghans should be lucky that when we deport them back to Afghanistan, we actually land the plane first. So suffice it to say, sentiment is not super well, and all of these Afghan NGOs and the protests that are occurring on active military bases in the Middle East after we saved them from their own country, yeah, maybe they should cool it on that, but they're not, so tensions are probably going to remain high for a while. And all of this just goes to show how complex of an issue this is, because it's not just Afghanistan, right? It's other communities as well. Again, Somalia has been in the spotlight over the past few weeks for much the same reasons. But for now, the general attitude is that there is a lot of overlap between counter-immigration and counter-terrorism, and we're finding out that a lot of the people that we imported into the United States in good faith, not just the people that we let walk over the border, but the people who we actively helped to save, a lot of them are not really super grateful for that. I'm sure a lot of them are, but again, a lot of them aren't. And it doesn't help that you have all these NGOs stoking up dissent and trying to get these migrants to conduct terrorist attacks because they're afraid that they're going to get deported. So risk is pretty high all the way around, and I guess we're just going to have to see how it works out. Now, wrapping things up today with our friends across the pond, things aren't doing so well over in the UK either. I didn't mention it this week because I got kind of sidetracked due to the terrorist attack in DC, but this week the UK has had kind of a bombshell development with regards to their criminal justice system. And this has taken the form of an extremely volatile controversy emerging following a series of leaked documents or leaked emails that were produced by Justice Secretary David Lammy, who's also the Deputy Prime Minister. These emails are really pertaining to a plan that is currently in the works to ban all criminal trials by jury except for cases of extreme crimes like murder, very serious and brutal assaults, things like that. This is all theoretical. Nothing's actually been set in stone yet. Nothing's been decided on, but they're trying to kind of like float this out there and leak it to see what the reaction is, as if they didn't already know what the reaction to this is going to be. But this plan involves the creation of a new level of courts within the justice system, which are going to decide which cases will be granted the right to a trial by jury, and which cases are going to go back down to the lower courts to transition to more bench ruling, kind of rubber stamp sort of judgments. Obviously, if the British government wanted to see what the public's reaction to this would be, it's not very favorable, because it more or less completely upends centuries of British law, and also a lot of the U.S. legal system is based on these precedents too. So most of us know that in the United Kingdom, the right to a jury trial is absolutely cemented in the bedrock of British law, most notably in the Magna Carta in 1215, one of the most influential founding documents of Western civilization at large. The right to a jury trial in the United Kingdom, at least, was further set in stone by the English Bill of Rights, again in 1689. So this has been a thing for centuries, really. However, that might not be obvious to David Lammy. As indelicate as it is, we've got to talk about this. And David Lammy is legendary, and I mean legendary, throughout British politics for being extraordinarily unintelligent. We're talking very, very low IQ here. Even members of his own party say that he's low IQ, okay? So that should tell you something. So when David Lammy says things like this and decides to upend almost 800 years of the legal system of not just Britain, but the entire Western civilization at large, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is more or less, well, that's just David Lammy, you know? Most people seem to think that there's a pretty good chance that he doesn't actually know what the Magna Carta is. He might not actually know that there's this thing called the English Bill of Rights. He might not actually know this, and I'm being literal with this here. He might not actually factually know this. Again, this sounds like a cheap personal insult, but this is really what most of the British government seems to be operating on right now. So, yeah, it's not super great. Now, one of the biggest problems with having the village idiot convey the fact that you're trying to overthrow 800 years of British law is that people tend to not take him very seriously, and that would probably be a mistake. So let's backtrack a little bit and examine why this came about. So this scandal stems from a backlog of criminal cases. Really, the UK is overwhelmed with criminal trials that are sometimes backlogged for many years. Right now, there are roughly 78,000 criminal cases that are currently awaiting trial, so the proposed solution to this backlog is to just get rid of jury trials altogether. So on the one hand, this is definitely a David Lammy-ism, you know, cutting your arm off to save your finger from a paper cut kind of thing. But on the other hand, David Lammy's not acting alone. He is not acting unilaterally, right? He himself is a cog in a much larger machine. That machine is the British government, and that machine is also not particularly fond of this thing called, human rights. It's also important to remember that this is not exactly his idea either. He's not the first one to come up with this. He's not the mastermind behind this. There are a few retired high-ranking judges that have kind of put the bug in his ear with regards to this. And a lot of other judges, since this kind of came to light, a lot of judges in the UK wholeheartedly support it, because of course they do. You're telling a judge that they're going to have unlimited power to throw people in jail for the rest of their life just because they didn't have the right breakfast that morning? Yeah, of course they're going to love that power, so no surprise there, right? But again, this is all just kind of theoretical. They haven't really done it yet, but everyone kind of assumes that they're going to be doing it. They're just kind of leaking it first to see how angry people get, and then they're going to figure out how much effort to put into covering it up over the next few weeks when it finally comes to fruition. Right now, a lot of people are just kind of brushing this off as a classic David Lammy-ism, and that this plan isn't really serious. It might not be. It might not be a serious plan, but from a risk management perspective, it would be unwise to think that this is just, some idiot who thinks that he might have a solution to something. And of course, the final decision doesn't really rest with David Lammy either. He's just the face of this whole thing. Ultimately, it's his boss who's on the chopping block for this, the Prime Minister himself. So we'll have to see how it works out. There have been a lot of developments in the UK this week, things that have not gone super well, and our friends across the pond are getting a little ornery, as one might expect, justifiably so, with all of these developments that have been taking place. Migrant crime has continued. Criminals have been released from prison by accident. That's continued in hundreds of cases. Crackdown on speech has continued and gotten a whole lot worse. Dogs and cats are living together. It's mass hysteria, right? The good news is that a lot of very, very capable British citizens are starting to get to the point to where they're fed up with this and they're looking for solutions to the problem more deliberately. Of course, easier said than done, right? One of the very first steps is to have a critical mass of people who want the situation to change. The situation will not change no matter how bad it gets if you don't get a critical mass of people behind some effort to change things. And that is certainly occurring right now, so we'll have to see what our friends come up with over there, and hopefully we can help them out as best we can from a speech crime perspective, because as we all know, one of the main reasons I focus on the UK so much is because what happens over there eventually ends up over here. The difference being is that the cultures are just different enough to make the situation not exactly a perfect analog between the two of us, but we here in Freedom Land certainly have our origins back in the UK, and a lot of our legal system and a lot of the problems that we have is based on their civilization. So that's why it's worth kind of keeping an eye on these very, very dystopian things that are occurring overseas. And with that, that's all I have for today. I would finish up with the Intercepted GhostNet reports for today. However, I missed the window due to Turkey Day downtime. I did tune in a little bit later, but I missed the main window, so I can't get screenshots for you to show any of the Thanksgiving Day messages that were sent out, so sorry about that. But I did see a lot of heartbeats later on after the window, so I know a lot of people did leave their radios on this week, so it was probably a good net, but I missed it this week. Sorry, guys. But yeah, hopefully next week we'll be able to get right back to it. Now that the solar weather has kind of calmed down just a tiny bit for now, maybe we'll see if we can get some pretty good exchanges of information around the world. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Thank you guys for sticking with me, and hopefully we can make it through next week without too many catastrophes happening, but either way, we'll do the best we can no matter what. So thanks again, and I will see you all next time. And as always, fight of the shade.